This is a little chilly in here, huh? Morning? Are you? Wake up?
Okay, we're starting!
this song's a little bit new, but I think it fits DC3 really well. It's called 1,000 Tongues. Just kind of talking about church and us being together and singing together and praising Him as one body together. So let's do that.
Overwhelming, never-ending.
discussion question. So kind of just turn to each other, greet each other, say hello. Discussion
It's amazing! Don't use your
Kids are dismissed.
So one of my students, Cam, actually suggested that we do something sometimes that I'll do when I can tell in class that either that's probably a good thing.
That'll help.
For now. Two, one, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I can't hear you! 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 4, 3, 2, 1. 4, 3, 2, 1. 4, 3, 2, 1. 4, 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, I got into quite a lot better shape Moldova, but that still gets the blood going. All right, I'm on officially according to my mic.
Sorry.
We good now? I promise I won't yell. Well, I can't promise, I guess. I will try not to yell. All right. How can you hear me? Hear me okay? Is the mic on? If it's not working,
You see a green light on your...
I don't. It's clicked to on.
Might be a battery.
So
All right. So today, this is the idea that I invite you to reflect on as we work through what for some of you might be a familiar story. The story of King Solomon. This is the question, a set of questions that I invite you to consider. What do you see? What do you see? Do you have eyes to see? What do you see? What do you see? Do you have eyes to see? In keeping with this theme, next slide. How many of you can see the images that are in these magic eye things? How many? What's in this? Fish? So what's the 3D image that's behind the images? That you have to kind of make your eyes go wonky to be able to see. That I cannot see. That I don't have eyes to see.
Not close
Anybody see it?
Can you bring it down?
Basket or flip-flops, somebody says. I have no
Walk
idea.
up to it.
I don't have the eyes to see this. I can't tell you if you're right or wrong.
Can I walk up to it?
Lexi, you in the back, you thought you saw it.
They're dolphins.
You see dolphins? Anybody see the dolphins?
Did you just say what they want? Who's gonna do that? More or less,
I don't have eyes to see what's going on in these magic eye things, and it drives me nuts. I've actually looked up on the internet what could be wrong with me to see why I cannot see them, why I can't see them. The internet told me that maybe there's something wrong with my brain. Well, you maybe knew that already. Or maybe there's something wrong with my eyes, and I should go see my eye doctor. These are all possibilities. The internet also told me maybe I just don't have enough patience or focus. That's when I believe. No matter what the reason, I don't have the eyes to see these things. And I've tried over and over and over and over. Unlike Lexi, who saw it so quickly, I was like, don't tell anybody yet, just save it for the sermon. I don't have the eyes to see. What's the first thing that you see in your mind's eye when you think about King Solomon? What pops into your mind? How would you maybe describe King Solomon in one word?
Well, I can't describe it in one word, but I can describe what I see in my mind.
What do you see in your mind?
A king with as wide as feet behind him, with as far as the eye can see.
A king with all of these wives, yeah, about 1,000. Other things that you see in your mind's eye when you think of Solomon? What else? What else do you see when you think of Solomon? Riches, wealth, success story. What else do you see? Wisdom. And that's really the word that comes into my mind, that I associate most closely with Solomon. I also think of the riches and the wives. Anybody else think of maybe the temple that he built? Right? We think of the story where God comes to Solomon in a dream and asks him, ask what I will give you. And how does Solomon reply to that? What does Solomon answer God when God says, ask what I will give you? What does he ask for? He asks for wisdom. He asks for wisdom. The next slide talks about that. Solomon's response. If you go back into the text and you read that whole story of what's happening there, that chapter opens up with Solomon marrying one of the first of his many wives. he marries the daughter of Pharaoh. Listen to how you see what's going on here in this story as I walk you through it in Kate's Living Translation. Solomon made an ally of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He married his daughter, and while he was working on building his own house, while he was finishing up the hard work building the house of the Lord, he kept Pharaoh's daughter in the city of David. Now at this time, because no house had been built for God yet, because there wasn't a temple that had been built, the people were sacrificing at the high places. Solomon loved the Lord. He walked in the ways of his father David, only maybe because there wasn't a temple yet. He made sacrifices at the high places, which sounds a little confusing. On one such occasion, the king went to a high place, the biggest, most important high place, up into the mountains to offer sacrifices to God. At that place, the Lord appears to Solomon in a dream and says, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon responds by saying, "Wisdom. Give me wisdom to be able to rule over your people." The Lord is pleased when Solomon asks this. And God says to him, "Because you have asked this, because you've asked for wisdom to be able to rule your people, you haven't asked that you would be successful for yourself. You haven't asked for riches. You haven't asked for victory over the enemies around you. But because you asked for wisdom, I'll respond by giving you what you asked for. I will give you such a wise mind, that there won't be anybody else who has the same kind of wisdom as you. And on top of that, I'll give you what you haven't asked for, riches and honor, so that nobody else, no other king can possibly compare. If you walk in my ways, God says, if you keep my commands, my laws, my decrees, as your father David also kept them, and I'll even lengthen your life. So as you listen to this story, how many are pretty familiar? You've heard this. And this might even be the story that kind of pops into your mind when you think of Solomon. He asks, when he could have asked for anything, for wisdom. It pleases God, and God says, I'll give it to you. And because you've not just asked for wisdom, but also because you've only asked for wisdom, and not all the other stuff I could have given you, I'm going to bless you with these other things. But keep my commandments. Pretty familiar, right? What does it feel like to you? What do you see first as you're listening to that maybe familiar story? Is it positive or negative? Mostly pretty good, right? You might think if you read elsewhere, in 1 Chronicles 22:9, see, a son shall be born to you. This is God's words to David. A son will be born to you, and he shall be a man of peace. I will give him peace from all his enemies on every side. His name will be Solomon, and I will give him peace and quiet all of his days. These are the things that you might see first. Go ahead and go to the next slide. What do you see first when you look at this picture? Birds? Anybody else see anything? There's a moon? There's a moon with a mustache. What do you see first? What do you see first? When we first see the story of Solomon, we think of him as a man who was wise enough to ask for wisdom, and we think of him as a man of peace. But then consider, as we go back into the story, just a few chapters before the story that we just covered about Solomon asking for wisdom. King David, his father, is on his deathbed. He's dying. He's aged. And he says to Solomon several things. In your wisdom, act according to your wisdom. Don't let this guy named Joab go down to the grave in peace. As you look through chapter 1, the first description of what's happening in Solomon's reign. Solomon's reign is not a peaceful reign. If you have eyes to see it, you see that the peace comes first after blood. What do you see? Do you have eyes to see? As I'm preparing for this sermon, I struggled with the fact that I knew how this story ends. I knew about the wives, Micah. I knew that at the end of the day, Solomon turns away from God. Solomon makes all of these different altars to other gods, and he falls away. And so I wondered, at what point does Solomon stop being wise? At what point does Solomon change? At what point? And as I worked back through the story, it occurred to me that maybe the way I had been reading the story before, the eyes I had been using to read, were a little bit off. That maybe underneath what's going on here in this story is that Solomon was never quite exactly as good as he appeared to be. Maybe not quite. Maybe not quite. Think about what David is saying here, his father, on his deathbed. He says, act according to your wisdom. And then he tells him what to do. Act according to your wisdom. Kill the guy I wasn't going to kill. Make sure that you take care of him the way I want you to. What do you see? What do you see?
Don't call me
Next
stupid,
time.
Marina. Mommy.
right after. And then the next slide. I think our slides are out of sync. That's all right. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll go there. What do you see? An alligator? What do you see?
I see a rock zooming through the sky.
A rock zooming through the sky? Oh, interesting. I hadn't seen that one.
Space rock.
Space rock? Nice. What else do you see? Anybody see the boat? What did you see first? I saw the alligator first.
There's a heartbeat.
Can you go back up? This verse appears at the very end of the story of the two women who come to Solomon for a judgment. Anybody remember that story? The two women who come to him for a judgment? Anybody remember it? What happens in that story? There's a baby. There's two babies and two women. And the two women come to Solomon because one of their babies is dead. And she says, during the night, this other woman, we're in the same house, we're living in the same house, and during the night, this baby died. Her baby died. And because she didn't want to lose her baby, she swapped her baby with mine. And when I woke up, I realized that she had swapped our babies. And she comes to Solomon and has to help. Help. And so, anybody remember what Solomon responds with?
Sword.
He says, give me a sword. We'll cut the live baby in 2 pieces. We'll give 1/2 to each mom, and that should be good enough. Well, the mom of the living baby says, don't do that. But the mom whose baby had died says, go ahead, that's good enough. And so Solomon, in his wisdom, says, guess which one's the real mom? At this, the people go, wow. Wow. What wisdom. What wisdom. Seems a little cruel to me, but the people are amazed at his wisdom. Go back up one more slide. Up. Maybe down?
Which verse is it?
We opened up the new one, or the,
Okay.
no, so it should be
Oh,
exactly
okay.
where you have, so.
So Deuteronomy 16:18 is the one. Yay! I think we're on the same page now. Thanks, y'all. Technology, the blessing and bane of my existence. If you have eyes to see, if you know the law, then as you're listening to this story of Solomon's wisdom, it's possible that your brain might go back to this section in Deuteronomy. This section in Deuteronomy, in the law, says to Moses, appoint judges and officials throughout the tribes, in all the towns that the Lord your God is giving you, and let them be the ones to make decisions. According to the law, is the king supposed to be the one who makes all of these decisions? No. According to the way God sets it up in Torah, the decisions are supposed to be made by the people who are closest to those situations, located in those towns. I don't know for sure. I think there's a lot of subtlety going on in this story. I think you are meant to have to think about it. But I wonder if perhaps part of what's going on and how the story of Solomon is being told is that the very thing that gives him such a status in the eyes of the people, his wisdom in discerning and making a decision between these two women, maybe that shouldn't have been happening at all. Maybe he shouldn't have been the one hearing that case in the first place. I wonder. I don't know. But you see what I'm saying? I don't know for sure. And I want to make sure that I am paying attention to what's going on in Scripture, not just reading it according to my first glance. Not just reading it according to the lens that I've been taught my whole life. I want to make sure that I am reading it with wise eyes. Eyes that know the law of the Lord. Eyes that are familiar, that are with God's ways, that are fixed on God's ways. And if I am reading this story with the deep knowledge of Torah that the kings whom God didn't really want to have in place anyway were supposed to have, then perhaps my brain would have gone back to this kind of commandment. Next slide. What do you see? How many see a duck?
I can see both of them.
How many see something else? What do you see? A rabbit. What do you see? What do you see first? Do you have eyes to see both? What do you see? What do you see first? Do you have eyes to see both? Go ahead and skip through to the alligator. And then the next slide. Nice to be on track. The temple that Solomon builds, the house of the Lord that Solomon builds, he uses manual labor. The text talks about how he conscripts. He pulls from all of Israel. He gathers together massive numbers of workers who spend tons of hours. This is in 1 Kings 6 and 7 as he's working on building the temple. He gathers together these massive numbers of workers, especially people who go into the stone quarries and they dress the stone there. And the text makes kind of a point as it's describing how Solomon builds this temple. It makes the point that there's not a sound of stones being cut at the actual building site where the temple is being built. It makes kind of a point of saying that, because all of the cuttings of the stone that were used in building the temple happened at the quarries. It makes kind of this point of it. All of the work was done in the quarries ahead of time. By the time the stones get to the work site, the workers have already dressed them. If I'm hearing that and thinking about how I know work sites usually are, like how would you describe construction sites? Usually. Noisy and messy. But if I read in this account of how the temple is being built, that there's not even a sound of stone being cut, because all that work is done off-site before. How do I think about this construction site? What's going on here? It's kind of quiet. It's nice. It's well ordered. Have eyes to see, though. That work, the work that it took to make this work site quiet and peaceful, maybe even sacred, happened in the quarries ahead of time, and happened by the conscripted labor force that Solomon pulls from all of Israel. If you have eyes to see it, there may be something else going on here. You with me? You tracking? It does go on to say, here, a few chapters later, that Solomon doesn't make slaves of Israelites. Instead, he makes Israelites into soldiers and officials and commanders, captains, and the commanders of his chariotry and cavalry. He doesn't make them slaves, he makes them soldiers. Next slide. If you have eyes to see, if you have ears to hear, if you remember how God's prophet Samuel had described the kings back in 1 Samuel, you'll remember that he will say, that he says, that if you get a king to reign over you, he's going to do exactly what Solomon does. He's going to take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to his cavalry. The text directly echoes, how Samuel describes what a king's going to look like. But you have to have eyes to see it. Next slide. What do you see? See poles? Pillars? What else do you see? Two women talking? What do you see? How many see the two people talking? Two women talking. How many of you saw that first? How many saw the pillars first? What do you see? What do you see first? Do you have eyes to see both? Next slide. After God has appeared in the dream to Solomon at the very beginning of his reign, after God has asked Solomon to ask what he should be given, God says to Solomon, if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, I will lengthen your life. I will bless you. God echoes that same reminder of his blessing in 1 Kings 6 after the temple is completed. He says the same thing. Concerning this house that you are building, thinking about this temple that you have built in my name, if you walk in my statutes and obey my ordinances and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will establish my promise with you, which I made to your father David. I will dwell among the people, the children of Israel, and I will not forsake my people. Thinking about all that we have heard, thinking about all of the other things, maybe the second thing that's going on in this text, the way that my mind goes back to the law, the hints that maybe there's some double meanings here. I realized as I was rereading and preparing for this sermon that whereas I had first heard this text with God's voice sort of happy and kind and and gracious. At this point, looking back, seeing all of this stuff underneath, that maybe I heard something of a plea in God's voice. This house that you are building, if only you will obey my commands, if only you will submit to my law, I promise you, I will never forsake my people. I made this promise to your dad, and I will keep it if only you will obey. What do you hear? What do you see? What do you see? The story of Solomon ends with this text. Let me read it again. We have it here in the NRSV. I'd like to read it, to kind of talk through it in Kate's Living Translation, as I am wondering if perhaps maybe it should be read. It was only after all of these things that the Lord, who is slow to anger, became angry with Solomon, because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had shown up in his life in a big way twice and had commanded him to be faithful, had commanded him, reminded him twice not to follow other gods. But when Solomon refused, and when finally Solomon disobeyed totally and completely, when he, only after he had disobeyed so completely, then and only then does the Lord, who is slow to anger, become angry. And God says, because you have not obeyed, the kingdom will no longer belong to you. And even in this, even in my anger, I will still be gracious. I will remember my promise to your father, and you won't see the kingdom wrenched away. I won't tear it out of your hand, but I will from your side. And even once I tear it away from your side, even then, I'll leave one tribe with him. Because that's the kind of God I am. What do you see? What do you see first? Do you have eyes to see that maybe there's more than one thing going on here? And do you have the wisdom to see the difference? The story is told of a young man who thought he was wise. And he comes to a rabbi. Anybody heard this story? The rabbi, two men fall down the chimney. One cleans his face, and the other doesn't clean his face. Anybody heard this story? You? Okay. So this young man who thinks he's wise comes to a rabbi and says, I'd like to, start interpreting and start doing rightly by the Word of God. I think I've got it. I think I've got some wisdom. So the rabbi says, okay, then answer me this question. And he holds up two fingers. And he says, two men fell down a chimney. One comes out with a clean face, and the other comes out with a dirty face. And the rabbi asks the young man, so which one washes his face? Which one? Two men fall down a chimney. One comes out with a clean face, one with the dirty face. Which one washes his face? What would you say? Yeah, go ahead.
Probably the one with the dirty
Why would he wash his face? And that's exactly how the young man responds. He says, the one who had the dirty face, he washes his face. And guess what the rabbi says? Wrong! Oh, why is he sorry? He says wrong. The one with the clean face washes his face because he looks at the man, the other man, who has the dirty face, and he realizes, oh, I should probably wash my face. Because his face is dirty, so he washes his face. Oh, okay. The young man says, I get it now. Try me again. Give me another question. So the rabbi holds up 2 fingers and he says, 2 men fell down a chimney. One comes out with a clean face, the other comes out with a dirty face. Which one washes his face?
The dirty one.
Yeah. The one who had the clean face washes his face because he sees his friend who had the dirty face and thinks he needs to wash his face. The rabbi says, wrong. Wrong. The one with the dirty face, both actually wash their face because the one with the dirty face sees the guy with the clean face washing his face and says, oh, my face must be dirty too, so he cleans it. So both of them wash their face, even though the clean face guy really didn't need to. Okay, I get it, says the young man. I get it, that makes sense. Try me again. So guess what the rabbi does? He holds up 2 fingers. He says, 2 men come down the chimney. One comes out with a clean face, the other comes out with a dirty face. Which one washes his face? So the young man says, he knows the routine now. He says, both of them wash their face. Obviously, that's what you just told me. And the rabbi says, wrong. Neither one washes his face. The one with the dirty face looks at the other guy who has the clean face, thinks his face is clean, doesn't wash it. The one with the clean face looks at the one with the dirty face and thinks his face is dirty. But when the one with the clean face sees that the one with the dirty face doesn't wash his face, he thinks, oh, well, I guess I don't need to either. And neither of them wash their face. And so the young man says, okay, get it. Try me one more time. Try me one more time. 2 men fall down a chimney. One washes his face and one doesn't. Which one washed his face?
The dirty one.
So the young man says, neither one washed his face. And the rabbi says, what?
Wrong.
Wrong? How is it possible, tell me, wise one, for 2 men to fall down a chimney and only one of them has a dirty face? This is a ridiculous question. If you had wisdom, you would have been able to recognize the foolishness of this question and no longer try to answer me. What do you see? What do you have eyes to see? What do you see first? What do you see in this one?
First I saw like a cake with
According to the internet, and in all of its wisdom, there are 3 things, kind of 3 main images here. A man with binoculars and a hat. A car, his hands working on a car. And there's one more. The letter A. The letter A.
I see a round as well.
So let me end with this, y'all. The way I have brought these questions to this text, the other texts that I have thought about, that I am reminded of, where my mind goes, I can't tell you if that's how you're supposed to read this story. I can't. I don't know. I've got to be humble enough to admit I don't have the wisdom to tell for sure. But But I ask you, what eyes do you have? What eyes are you bringing to the text? What do you see? What do you see first? And do you have eyes to see other possibilities? Because this text and how Solomon ends up reminds me that if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. And if nothing else that I've noticed as a possible interpretation for a meaning underneath the meaning is an accurate view, is intended by the author in this telling of the story of Solomon. If nothing else is true. And notice where Solomon ends. And notice how God treats him. As slow to anger, abounding in love, and with complete and total grace, even in the midst of God's justice. Pray. Thank you, Lord, for walking me through this text. I pray that we as a church may have eyes to see what you are doing. We may have hearts that are willing to yield. And that we would fix our eyes on you so that our vision and our spirits would be clear and unified. In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and through the power of the Holy Spirit, we pray.
Good morning, everybody. We've got a few announcements, but first I just want to welcome any visitors we have here today. You may have noticed, if you've been to other church services, there's some things that might have been missing that you're used to seeing, such as long prayer time or communion that we share together or offering, things of that nature. That's not because we don't believe in that at Delta. It's because this is only a small piece of our church together. If you think of, I was trying to think of other analogies of what this is like. For me, the one that popped in my mind this week was a cinnamon roll. So if you've ever had a cinnamon roll, the whole thing's good. Everybody's going to devour the whole thing probably. But the outside edge, it's good, but not as good as that gooey center that's got all the icing drizzled on it and all the cinnamon packed into it. This service is kind of like the outside edge of our cinnamon roll. And if you want to learn more about the inside gooey center of our cinnamon roll, that is what we'd have in our small group times, or what we call branches, where we meet throughout the week in a smaller group and have a meal together with communion and share our lives together, pray for one another. And if you want to learn more about that, you can meet somebody at the back table back there, Caleb, who's just standing up there. He's going to be at the back table. He'd be happy to explain when and where those meet and how you can get more involved, or just answer any general questions you have about the church. We also, because we like to eat together, we'd love to take you out to eat. If it's your first time here, or if you haven't had a chance to go out to eat with us, we'd like to try to take you out and get to know you better, answer questions, and just share our lives together a little bit. So, again, just meet back there at that table and we can work out the details. And then just some general announcements we've got for this week. Corey and Justin have a meal train going for bringing meals to them for their new baby, and I think I saw there's like one day left this week on Thursday. If you haven't had a chance to make a meal for them, or if you have the ability to and don't know where to sign up for that, talk to Hope Ford or anybody else who might know. And there's a mentor kickoff today, so if you're a mentor or mentee, whatever that's called, 2 o'clock this afternoon at the Appleby House, I believe. And not this Wednesday, but a week from Wednesday, there's a new member party for a whole slew of new members. We've got Micah, Corey, Justin, Lizzie, and Cam. And that's at 6 p.m. at the Bunces. I'm sure that'll be announced next week too as a reminder, but if you want to get on your calendar, that's awesome. And then I think that's it unless there's any other.
Yeah, so Nolan and Kate McCausey moved into their new house yesterday, and they, Nolan wrote me yesterday and he just wished to express their thanks to everybody who has helped them over the last couple of weeks with the various projects. They're very grateful for that.
Awesome, thanks. Any other announcements? All right, go in peace.